Hello and welcome back. Today is November 21st, 2024, and we are reading Chapter 15 of Lirael by Garth Nix today. And just as predicted last week, early this morning when I was still sleeping, it snowed. So I got to wake up to a big blanket of white on everything, and it was cold, and my kid was so excited. So he and I went outside straight away this morning and made our first snowman of the year. So he's almost melted. He's only about a foot tall. There was not enough snow to make a huge snowman, but we made a little guy. But it was a lot of fun, and I was totally pooped after we were done. I had to beg him to come inside. I was feeling sick. I hadn't eaten anything, and it was cold and bright, but it just smelled crisp and beautiful outside, and it's so nice to see the sky all different shades of gray and the rolling clouds, and there were a few bunnies scampering through the woods we got to see. But I'm ready to read, and hopefully it won't be too murky outside the rest of the week. Usually after a snow like this where it doesn't last very long, it melts quickly. It's just a big swamp outside for a few days, so not looking forward to that, but I did get to take some cute pictures today, so I'm gonna get to reading. Let's get started. Chapter 15. The Dead Are Many. 5 minutes later, the entire team was out in the rain, on the road, jogging south. At Samuth's suggestion, they had armed themselves with cricket bats, metal-tipped cricket stumps, and cricket balls. The MP sergeant ran with them, his revolver continuing to silence Cochrane's protests. The boys took it all as a bit of a joke at first, with much bravado and carrying on. But as it got darker, and the rain got heavier, they grew quieter. The jokes stopped altogether when 4 quick shots were heard behind them, and then a distant, anguished scream. Samuth and the sergeant exchanged a look that combined fear and a dreadful knowledge. The shots and the scream must have come from Lance Corporal Harris, who had gone back to the post. "Is there a stream or other running water near here?" panted Samuth, mindful of the warning rhyme he'd known since childhood about the dead. The sergeant shook his head, but didn't answer. He kept glancing back over his shoulder, almost losing his balance as they ran. A little while after they heard the scream, he saw what he was looking for and pointed it out to Samuth. 3 red parachute flares drifting down from a few miles north. "Harris must have got the pigeon off, at least," he puffed. "Or maybe the telephone worked, since his pistol did. They'll have the reserve company and a platoon of scouts out here soon, sir." "I hope so," replied Samuth. He could sense the dead on the road behind them now, coming up quickly. There seemed to be no hope of safety anywhere ahead. No stout farmhouse, or barn, or a stream whose running water the dead couldn't cross. In fact, the road went down to become a sunken lane, even darker and more closed in. A perfect site for an ambush. As Sam thought of that, he felt his sense of death suddenly alter. It disoriented him at first, till he realized what it was. A dead spirit had just risen in front of them, somewhere in the darkness around the high-banked road. Worse than that, it was new, brought out of death at that very moment. These were no self-willed dead spirits that had infiltrated through the perimeter. They were dead hands, raised by a necromancer on the Ancestieran side of the wall. Controlled by the necromancer's mind, they were much more dangerous than rogue spirits. "Stop!" screamed Sam, his voice cutting through the beat of rain and footsteps on the asphalt. "They're ahead of us! We have to leave the road!" "Who are ahead, boy?" shouted Cochrane, furious again. "This has gone quite far enough." His voice faltered as a figure stumbled out of the shadows ahead, out into the middle of the road. It was human, or had once been human, but now its arms were hanging threads of flesh, and its head was mostly bare skull, all deep eye hollows and shining teeth. It was unquestionably dead, and the reek of decomposition rolled off it, over the soft smell of the rain. Clods of earth fell from it as it moved, showing that it had just dug itself out of the ground. "Left!" shouted Sam, pointing. "Everyone, go left!" His shout broke the silent tableau into action. Boys leaping over the stone wall that bordered the road. Cochrane was one of the first over, throwing his umbrella aside. The dead thing moved too, breaking into a shambling run as it sensed the life it craved. The sergeant propped himself against the wall and waited till it was 10 feet away. Then he emptied his heavy .455 revolver into the creature's torso. 5 shots in quick succession, accompanied by a gasp of relief that the weapon actually worked. The creature was knocked back and finally down, but the sergeant didn't wait. He'd been on the perimeter long enough to know that it would get back up again. Bullets could stop dead hands, but only if the creatures were shredded to pieces. White phosphorus grenades worked better, burning them to ash, when they worked. Guns and grenades and all such standards of Ancestarian military technology tended to fail the closer they got to the wall in the Old Kingdom. "Up the hill!" shouted Sam, pointing to a rise in the ground ahead, where the forest thinned out. If they could make it there, at least they could see what was coming and have the slight advantage of high ground. A harsh, inhuman cry rose behind them as they ran, a sound like a broken bellows accidentally trodden on, more squeal than scream. Sam knew it came from the desiccated lungs of a dead hand. This one was farther to the right than the one the sergeant had shot. At the same time, he sensed others, moving around to the right and left, beginning to encircle the hill. "There's a necromancer back there," he said as they ran, "and there must be a lot of dead bodies, not too far gone. A truck full of those Sutherlings ran off the road near here 6 weeks ago," said the sergeant, speaking rapidly between breaths. 19 killed. Bit of a mystery where they were going, anyway. Churchwarden at Archell wouldn't have 'em. The army crematorium neither, so they were buried next to the road. "Stupid!" cried Samuth. "It's too close to the wall. They should have been burnt." "Bloody paper pushers," puffed the sergeant, nimbly ducking under a branch. "Regulations say no burying within the perimeter, but this is outside, see?" Samuth didn't answer. They were climbing the hill itself now, and he needed all his breath. He sensed that there were at least 12 dead hands behind them now, and 3 or 4 on each side going wide. And there was something, some presence, that was probably the necromancer, back where the bodies were, or had been, buried. The top of the hill was clear of trees, save for a few wind-blown saplings. Before they reached it, the sergeant called a halt, just short of the crest. "Right! Get in close! Are we missing anyone?" "How many?" 16, including Mr. Cochrane," said Nick, who was a lightning calculator. Cochrane glared at him, but was silent, ducking his head back down as he tried to get his breath back. "Everyone's here." "How long have we got, sir?" the sergeant asked Sam, as they both looked back down into the trees. It was hard to see anything. Visibility was reduced by both the increasingly heavy rain and the onset of night. "The first 2 or 3 will be on us in a few minutes," said Samuth grimly. "The rain will slow them a little. We'll have to knock them down and run stumps through them to try to keep them pinned. Nick, organize everyone into groups of 3, 2 batsmen and someone to hold the stumps ready. No, Hood, go with Asmer. When they come, I'll distract them. Then the batsmen must hit as hard as they can straight off in the legs and then hammer a stump through each arm and leg." Samuth paused as he saw one of the boys eyeing the 2.5-foot-long wooden stump with a metal spike on the end. From the expression on the boy's face, it was clear he couldn't imagine hammering it through anything. "These are not people," Sam shouted. "They're already dead. If you don't fight them, they will kill us. Think of them as wild animals, and remember, we're fighting for our lives." One of the boys started crying, without making a noise, the tears falling silently down his face. At first, Sam thought it was the rain, till he noticed the despairing stare that signified complete and utter terror. He was about to try some more encouraging words, when Nick pointed downhill and shouted, "Here they come!" 3 dead hands were coming out of the tree line, shambling like drunks, their arms and legs clearly not fully under control. The bodies had been too broken up in the crash, Sam thought, gouging their strength. That was good. It would make them slower and more uncoordinated. "Nick, your team can take the one on the left," he commanded, speaking quickly. "Ted, yours the middle, and Jack's the right. Go for their knees and hammer the stumps home as soon as you get them down. Don't let them get a grip on you. They're much stronger than they look. Everyone else, including you, please, Sergeant and Mr. Cochran, hold back and help any team that gets in trouble." "Yes, sir," replied the sergeant. Cochran merely nodded dumbly, staring at the approaching dead hands. For the first time in Sam's memory, the man's face was not flushed red. It was white, almost as white as the sickeningly pallid flesh of the approaching dead. "Wait for my order!" shouted Sam. At the same time, he reached into the charter. It was impossible to reach in most of Ancelstiere, but this close to the wall, it was merely difficult, rather like trying to swim down to the bottom of a deep river. Samuth found the charter and took a moment's comfort from the familiar touch of it, its permanence and its totality linking him to everything in existence. Then he summoned the marks he wanted, holding them in his mind while he formed their names in his throat. When he had everything ready, he punched out his right hand, 3 fingers splayed, each finger indicating one of the approaching dead creatures. "Annette! Kalou! Ferran!" he spat, and the marks flew from his fingers as shining silver blades, whistling through the air quicker than any eye could follow. Each one struck a dead hand, blowing a fist-sized hole straight through decaying flesh. All 3 staggered back, and one fell down, waving its arms and legs like a beetle thrown on its back. "Bloody hell!" explained one of the boys next to Sam. "Now!" shouted Sam, and the schoolboys rushed forward with a roar, waving their makeshift weapons. Sam and the sergeant went with them, but Cochran struck out on his own, running down the hill at a right angle to everyone else. Then there was a blur of screaming, bats rising and falling, the dull thud of stumps being driven through dead flesh and into the sodden ground. Sam experienced it all in a strange frenzy, such a tangled mess of sound, images, and emotion that he was never really sure what happened. He seemed to come out of this concentrated fury to find himself helping Druitt Minor hammer a stump through the forearm of a writhing creature. Even with a stump through each limb, it still struggled, breaking one stump and almost getting free, before some of the boys in reserve cleverly rolled a boulder over the loose arm. Everyone was cheering, Sam realized, as he stepped back and wiped the rain off his face. Everyone except him, because he could sense more dead, coming up from the road and on the other side of the hill. A quick survey showed that there were only 3 stumps left, and 2 of the 5 bats were broken. "Get back!" he ordered, quelling the cheering. "There's more on the way!" As they moved back, Nick and the sergeant came up close to Sam. Nick spoke first, quietly asking, "What do we do now, Sam? Those things are still moving. They'll get free within half an hour." "Troops from the perimeter will be here before then," muttered Sam, glancing at the sergeant, who nodded in affirmation. "It's the new ones coming up I'm worried about. The only thing I can think of doing—" "What?" asked Nick, as Sam stopped in mid-sentence. "These are all dead hands, not free-willed dead," replied Sam. "Newly made ones. The spirits in them are just whatever the necromancer could call quickly, so they're neither powerful nor smart. If I could get to the necromancer, who's controlling them, they'd probably attack each other or wander in circles. Quite a few might even snap back into death." "Well, let's get this necromancer chap," declared Nick stoutly. His voice was steady, but he couldn't help a nervous look back down the hill. "It's not as easy as that," said Sam absently. Most of his attention was on the dead hands he could sense around them. There were 10 down near the road, and 6 on the other side of the hill somewhere. Both groups were getting themselves into ragged lines. Obviously, the necromancer planned to have them all attack at once, from both sides. "It's not so easy," Sam repeated. "The necromancer is down there somewhere, physically at least, but he's almost certainly in death, leaving his body protected by a spell or some sort of bodyguard. To get at him, I'll have to go into death myself, and I don't have a sword or bells or anything." "Go into death?" asked Nick, his voice rising half an octave. He was clearly about to say something else, but he looked down at the staked-out dead hands and shut up. Not even time to cast a diamond of protection, Sam muttered to himself. He'd never actually been into death by himself before. He'd gone only with his mother, the Abhorsen. Now he wished desperately that she was here. But she wasn't, and he couldn't think of anything else to do. He could almost certainly get away himself, but he couldn't leave the others. Nick, he said, making up his mind, I'm going to go into death. While I'm there, I won't be able to see or sense anything here. My body will seem to be frozen, so I'll need you, and you, Sergeant, to guard me as best you can. I plan to be back before the dead get here, but if I'm not, try to slow them down. Throw cricket balls, stones, or anything else you can find. If you can't stop them, grab my shoulder, but don't touch me otherwise. Righto, replied Nick. He was clearly puzzled and afraid, but he put out his hand. Sam took it, and they shook hands, while the other boys looked at them curiously, or stared out into the rain. Only the sergeant moved, handing Sam his sword, hilt first. You'll need this more than I do, sir, he said. Then echoing Sam's own thoughts, he added, I wish your mum was here. Good luck, sir. Thanks, said Sam, but he handed the sword back. I'm afraid only a spelled sword would help me. You keep it. The sergeant nodded and took the sword. Sam dropped into a boxer's defensive stance and closed his eyes. He felt for the boundary between life and death and found it easily, for a moment experiencing the strange sensation of rain falling down the back of his neck, while his face was hit by the terrible chill of death where it never rained. Exerting all his willpower, Sam pushed towards the cold, making his spirit cross into death. Then, without warning, he was there, and the cold was all around him, not just on his face. His eyes flashed open, and he saw the flat, gray light of death, and felt the tug of the river's current at his legs. In the distance, he heard the roar of the first gate, and shivered. Back in life, Nick and the sergeant saw Sam's entire body stiffen suddenly. A fog came from nowhere, twining up his legs like a vine. As they kept staring, frost formed on his face and hands, an icy coat that was not washed off by the rain. I'm not sure I can believe what I'm seeing, whispered Nick, as he looked away from Sam and down at the approaching dead. You better believe it, said the sergeant grimly, because they'll kill you whether you believe in them or not. And that is the end of chapter 15. Oof. I hate the dead hands. I do not like anything that has to do with zombies. I've never liked zombie movies. I know everybody loves watching The Walking Dead and like the Apocalypse Z movies and stuff like that, but I've never liked zombies. But I love these books. Like, I don't know why these things don't count as zombies to me. That's exactly what they are. But anyways, I digress. I hope you enjoyed that reading. I certainly did. That was a lot of fun. And I would love it if you would like, comment, and subscribe. I will post the next chapter tomorrow evening at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And until then, have a great rest of your evening. If it snowed where you are, I hope that if you haven't gotten a chance to play in the snow, you go outside and touch some and just exist in the wintry expanse. But I'll see you tomorrow. Take care, and as always, may your magic manifest. Bye.